everybody. Here I am, Sally Goodwin at Sally Goodwin Ministries, and I am live on YouTube for the very first time. So let nobody tell you that I'm not constantly trying new things. But here I am, live on YouTube for the very first time. And generally I go live on Facebook, but the Holy Spirit has been speaking to me about different social media platforms, and so here I am. Good morning, joyful Jolene. Good morning, Stu. Okay, Stu, you need to be looking at the things and telling me what I need to do differently on YouTube, okay? Good morning, beautiful Bridget, because it asks me whether I must stream horizontally or stream vertically, and so I just said stream vertically because I presume most people watch on their phones. And yes, so anyway, good morning, courageous Claudia. Oh, okay, so some of your YouTube names are not your normal names. So I'm not sure who Live Art 838 is. But good morning, everybody. Nadine, my gorgeous, good morning. Okay, so here I am on YouTube, making my first foray into YouTube land. Sonia, there we go. Okay. I'm making my first foray into YouTube land. And so for those of you who might be watching for the very first time, here I am. All of you who have asked, please will you do lives on YouTube, that you prefer YouTube to Facebook, etc., etc. Here I am finally in all my splendor. Amazing, Anthea, good morning. And I am, this is Sally Goodwin Ministries. This is the platform, or the launch pad, should I say, for Sally Goodwin Ministries, for the Church Without Walls, for Activate Her, for Igero Prophetic School. It is all kind of encapsulated for the purposes of social media under the auspices of Sally Goodwin Ministries. But those things are all just the most amazing, vibrant, different communities. Radiant Reneel, way welcome. And yes, I'm so proud of all of you for finding it, not because I didn't think you could, but because I know for me personally I would have struggled. Heroic Hanley, good morning, and well done for remembering as well, my word. Okay, because I was going to put a post on Facebook to say that I'm going to be live on YouTube, and then I didn't get to it, but here you all are. I hope it looks different in a good way, not a bad way, Bridget. Anyway, but here I am otherwise. And welcome to this week's episode of Friday Feast. And all going well, we will continue to do the Friday lives on YouTube. Sunette, thank you, my special. I'm not alone on YouTube Island. We will continue to do the Friday lives on YouTube, and then the Mondays and Wednesdays on Facebook, until I get to comfortable enough to maybe do one on Instagram or something, I don't know. And also until I potentially can get some kind of streaming software that that will allow me to stream on more than one social media site at a time. But streaming software is very expensive, and and with the way the rand is going, most of the software you buy in pounds or dollars. So yeah, we'll just have to see about that. We're going to just trust the Lord. Thank you, Stu. Good morning, beautiful Bertha. So please, all of my lovely people, those who know me and love me, you are here with me for the very first time on YouTube. So this is an auspicious occasion, but please will you keep commenting so that I know that you're still there, so that I know that I haven't, gone off or lost something or done something. And then please, you can still you can obviously subscribe to my YouTube channel if you haven't subscribed yet, and you can click the notify me button. That will notify you every time I go live on YouTube, so that for the future you won't forget. And then also please still like and share. Like and share the same way that we do on Facebook. I would really appreciate that. So welcome, 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 everybody. It is so good to see you all here, honestly. YouTube, thank you, beautiful Bronwyn. I know, it's like, I mean, I'm supposed for so many people, it's kind of, oh my goodness, it's just a different, but I'm going to be 56 in July. I am doing technology to the best of my ability, but I'm the first to admit that I'm not right up there with like the technological experts. Okay, so we are in the month of Nisan, as you probably all know, and at sunset this evening, Passover begins, the Jewish feast of Passover, festival Passover, Pesach, and it is the month, if you listen to my teaching on the month of Nisan, it is the month of the lion and the lamb. Thank you, Jeanette. I don't feel particularly brave, but thank you very much. And I wanted to just show you, can you see my lion earrings? Is the light reflecting too badly? Can you see my lion earrings? How awesome are those? So my gorgeous Nicole friend, she from Prophetic School, she gave them to me for Easter. Isn't it amazing? Because I felt like there was something so prophetic. Easter is all about the lamb, right? I mean, the Passover is all about the lamb. Easter is all about the lamb that was slain, and how amazing is that? And so we very much focus on the lamb. But as an Easter gift, gorgeous Nicole gave me lion earrings, and I was so impacted when I took them out of the little gift bag and looked at them, and I felt the significance of being given the lion earrings over a period or over a season where we celebrate the lamb, because the month of Nisan is the month of the lion and the lamb. The book of Revelation speaks about the lion of Judah, and the lamb that was slain. And, the way Jesus represents both of those things, he represents the lamb and he represents the lion. So absolutely just loving the lion earrings, really just reminds me it reminds me that I have a roar that I can let loose, at times when I don't feel particularly brave or courageous. They remind me to be brave and courageous. Good morning, gorgeous Auntie Evie, welcome. So last night we had the most incredible evening at Igero Prophetic School, did we not? My lovelies from Igero Prophetic School was last night not amazing. I thought it was absolutely amazing. I felt like something shifted, like there was something that just shifted, and that whole kind of feeling of being a tribe and being a group of people, who are connected, really, really came together. It really was just, it was a different space last night. I was very, very, very excited, very happy by that. Okay, so we're talking about Passover, we've spoken about the month of Nisan, and so that we're heading into Passover at sunset this evening, and that is 8 days. It ends at sunset on the 20th of April, and then obviously our Easter weekend, or our weekend where we commemorate the crucifixion of Jesus and celebrate the resurrection, kind of falls within that space. And so it's just a time to really remember, just to remember what God did for the Israelites all of those years ago in when he took them and brought them out of Egypt, and what Jesus did on the cross, and what he does for us today, like every single day, that he's still a God of redemption, that he's still a God of restoration. Oh, my lovely Louise friend, all the way from New Zealand. Thank you for finding me in YouTube land, my lovely. Who knows? Maybe one day you'll find me in Instagram land. Who knows? So I actually just wanted to go back to the book of Exodus and to the story of the Exodus of the Israelites from Egypt. And if you read, and I'm pretty sure that you've all either been taught the story, or you've read the story, or you've read the book of Exodus, but you've read about how the Israelites, you would all remember that, excuse me if you can hear the barking dog, my neighbor's barking dog, but yes, nothing I can do about that. But I'm sure that you have heard the story or read the story of Exodus, and you've read the story of how, Joseph was sold by his brothers and landed up in Egypt and landed up as the second in command to Pharaoh by a pure miracle. But God had always ordained that that was going to be his destiny. And so that was, that was where he ended up. And then you have his brothers and his father all coming when there was famine in the land, coming to Egypt, and Joseph being able to provide for them, which was just an absolutely incredible miracle. And then they all, and then the Israelites basically landed up settling in Egypt, and they built a life there. They became a great people there, many in number. And the Pharaoh who died, obviously the Pharaoh who loved Joseph and appreciated him and then was happy to have his family alongside him, he died, and a different Pharaoh came in, and the Hebrews had grown. The Hebrew people had grown. They had been blessed by the Lord, and they had grown. They were great in number, and this obviously made that Pharaoh very uncomfortable, and he wanted to do the only thing that he felt he could do in order to keep this growing population of people who weren't actually Egyptian. In order to keep them under control, the only way he could do that was to make them slaves. So it's interesting, because if you read the story of the Egyptians and the Israelites, if you just read it as a historical an historical event, you can see the markings or the tenets or the of empire all over it. Because if you take the story of the Egyptians and the Israelites, if you take it out of the Old Testament sort of perspective, and you put it into any perspective today, or any perspective over the course of sort of history, you can understand, you can see, because we read it, and because it's Jacob and Joseph and the tribes of Israel, and we kind of think to ourselves, oh my goodness, how terrible is that, and how they were treated. But if you look at nations, nations in the world, and nations, the way nations work, you can see exactly how it is that kind of thing has occurred in nations around the world over history. Because what happens, either a nation takes over another nation, and the nation that takes over the other nation is unsure of the people who, or doesn't trust, or doesn't like, or doesn't want the people who live, or are already in that nation, and they then make great plans to keep those people suppressed and oppressed and all of that kind of thing. That is one thing. That is, what we know as colonialism that happens all around the world. And some of the nations of the world that have the biggest voices when it comes to human rights are the ones who have done the worst things to their original First Nations people of the land that they've occupied. So, sometimes the person who shouts the loudest is the one who has the most to apologize for, or the most to seek forgiveness for. But so that's, one way it's done. But then there's another way where, as people come into a land, as people come in as refugees, as they come in as immigrants, as they come in as all of these things, and they seek a place of safety and a place of refuge, that the people who live in that land and see this influx of foreigners then become a people who want to subjugate and oppress, because they are scared of maybe the amount of people. Maybe it's just, and look, we all understand in nations today, when you have immigrants and refugees and foreigners and all of that kind of thing, we understand crime, and we understand, all of that, the sort of thing that happens often in these spaces. And that is not something that must be tolerated at all. But there is also, a lot of space in the Bible where God speaks about the way you treat the foreigner, about the way you treat the refugee, about the way you treat the people who come into your nation because they have nowhere else to go, because they're fleeing from something, because they're desperate, because they're needy, because they're oppressed. And it's difficult often in a nation like ours when we already have our own people who are needy and oppressed and disadvantaged and poverty stricken and all of that sort of thing. But there isn't that. We need biblical, godly strategies as to how to deal with these things, because we just, as nations around the world, we just aren't dealing with them properly. We aren't. And I'm not speaking about the spread of Islam. I'm not speaking about grooming gangs and things like that are happening in various different spaces on the earth. That's not that's criminal. That needs to be dealt with. That needs to be sorted out. I'm not speaking about that. I'm speaking about the genuine refugee, the people who flee their nation because there is nothing for them. And then they flee into another nation because they're desperate and they have nothing. And then, that nation is now sitting in the space of, how do I treat these people? And so if you take the story of the Egypts and the Hebrews, and you don't read it just in that context, but you just read it in the context of the people around the earth today, you can see that story play out in nation after nation after nation after nation. So here we have the Israelites, and they have multiplied in Egypt, and they are thriving, and they still worship their own God. They have kind of stuck mostly to worshiping their own God. However, they do still, some of them, they kind of keep a foot in each camp, or sort of try and, hedge their bets and follow along with what some of the Egyptians do or did. And that's what you often will hear theologians and scholars say, that one of the reasons why the Israelites spent 40 years in the wilderness is because God had taken the Israelites out of Egypt, but it took him 40 years to get Egypt out of the Israelites. And I think that happens in the church space, that happens in the church space. When we understand that God is calling us to something new, when we understand that God is telling us to step into a new thing, when God calls us out of the church in terms of the man-made religious structures that we know of, when God calls us out of that and he says, separate yourselves out, come out from there, then we leave, we go out of that, but we land up just repeating Egypt in wherever we go. We leave Egypt, but we land up taking Egypt with us. And when God first started speaking to me about home churches or apostolic home hubs, or glory refuge centers, or whatever you would like to call them, when God first started speaking to me about that, it was a good few years ago, and I just said to the Lord, I am a product of that. I was in the 80s, when I was a teenager, house churches became all the people broke away from denominations and started house churches. That was all the rage. That was what my parents did. That was, and so you've done that before, Lord. When you speak about doing something new, I don't see that as new, because I see that as having already been done. And God said to me, yes, my people came out of Egypt, but they brought Egypt with them. They just did what they had done in their normal, ordinary church spaces. They just repeated that in their homes. They just repeated that. The format, the worship, the everything, they repeated it in their homes. And so my people, they came out of Egypt, but they they still carried Egypt with them, and they just repeated Egypt wherever they were. And so, that is something, because it is human nature to default to what we know. That is why so many times on the Israelites, on their journey out of Egypt, on their 40-year journey to the promised land, so many times they say, I wish we could go back to Egypt. We want to go back to Egypt. And they only remember all the good things about Egypt. They only remember all the things that they're missing out on now. They don't remember being slaves. They don't remember being treated badly. They don't remember being whipped and tortured, and sometimes they even say it would be better to die in Egypt than to actually die here in the desert, which is just, and we read the story today and we just like, oh my word, how can you even feel like that? And yet, that is what we do. It is human nature to default to what we know. It is human nature to default to the things that we've been raised in. And the Israelites had been in Egypt for something like 430 years. They had generations of people who had never ever, their only life they'd known was Egypt. That was all they'd known. And now they need to come out and do something completely different, and they had no idea how to do that, which is why fear was such a part of their existence as they journeyed, out of Egypt into the promised land. They had cried out for deliverance from God with an increasing amount, increasingly loudly, increasingly vociferously, over the 430 odd years that they had been there. They had cried out to God over and over and over again, and God had now come through, and he had heard their cries. And he had said, right, I'm now going to rescue you. But oh my goodness, were they a difficult people to rescue. Oh my word. So if we go to Exodus chapter 11. So Exodus chapter 11, God tells Moses that he's going to bring one more plague on Pharaoh. And we need to also remember that Pharaoh had a choice. God gave Pharaoh nine times to choose, 9 plagues where God proved who he was, and gave Pharaoh a choice. Just let the Israelites go, and the Egyptian life will continue as per normal. But by the 10th time, when Pharaoh had still hardened his own heart against God, by the 10th time, by the 10th plague, the biblical writings tell us that God hardened Pharaoh's heart. And you see, when things like that happen, firstly, we struggle to understand that, because we think, wow, the Lord, that doesn't seem fair. You hardened Pharaoh's heart, and maybe he could have actually still changed his mind that 10th time. But you made it that he wouldn't, or whatever, change his mind. And then that awful, horrible, terrible 10th plague happened. And as humans, we can absolutely agree that it was awful and horrible and terrible. But we also that needs to put us in a space where we stand in awe of the sovereignty of the Lord. When we stand in awe of the sovereignty of the Lord. God had given Pharaoh a chance over and over again, to the point where Pharaoh's own people, where the Egyptians were saying to Pharaoh, please let us go. Let the Israelites go. Let the Israelites go. And Pharaoh kept on just hardening his heart. And why was that? Well, what was the reasoning for that? Because Pharaoh, in the Egyptian culture, in the Egyptian space, Pharaoh was treated like a god. The pharaohs were supposed to be human gods in human form. They were called God, they were worshipped, they were bowed down to, even though they were simply men. They were treated like gods, and they believed their own publicity that they were actually gods. And so in Pharaoh's mind, he wasn't just, being difficult or, stubborn. He was standing as a god against God. What Pharaoh was saying to the God of Israel was, I am equal to you. And I can choose to say no. I can choose to defy you because I am equal to you. What Pharaoh's mistake was that he thought that him and the Lord were on, they were on the same, they had the same playing field because he was a God. And that was what God was dealing with all the way through the plagues. God was dealing with the different gods of Egypt, making sure that the Israelites could see and the Egyptians could see that those gods had no power. But the final God was Pharaoh. The final man who thought he was God was Pharaoh. And Pharaoh had an opportunity to say, okay, you are God. You are God. I am just a man. And even if I am a little bit of a God, I cannot stand against you. But he didn't. His pride, his ego, his belief in obviously centuries of Egyptian culture, and also his belief in himself as being a God because of his position. He couldn't. He could not back down. He could not back down. And God gave him opportunity after opportunity after opportunity. And eventually, God was like, okay, now you've had your chance. Now, even if you wanted to back down, you're not going to be able to. And that is like all of us. That is like all of us. We are all going to stand before Jesus one day. And when we stand before Jesus, we will stand alone before him. And Jesus will say, I gave you opportunity after opportunity after opportunity after opportunity after opportunity. And eventually, because that is just the way things go, you reach a point where it is your last opportunity. And if you don't take that opportunity, you don't take any opportunity. So here we have this. So Pharaoh filled with pride, filled with ego, all the things that still beset human nature today. Pharaoh, representative of kings of the earth, of political leaders, even today, who believe that because of where they are, because of the status they've acquired, because of the position they occupy, they have a right to equate themselves with God and to say, we don't need you. We are going to make our own strategy. We are going to do our own thing. Human nature, it's the same always. So here we have Pharaoh, and God actually hardens his heart eventually because he's had all the opportunities God is going to give him. And then Exodus chapter 12 verse 1, Adonai spoke to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, and he said, you are to begin your calendar with this month. It will be the first month of the year for you. And here we start with the month of Nisan. This is the month of Nisan, and it is thus the first month of the biblical year. And then he tells them, he says, speak to all the assembly of Israel and say, on the 10th day of this month, each man is to take a lamb or kid for his family, one per household. And it goes on, and then it's an animal without defect, and you are to keep it until the 14th day of the month. And I'm sure you all know this, but I was just thinking about that. I was thinking about the fact that they have to take the lamb on the 10th day of the month, and they keep it until the 14th day of the month. And then on the 14th day of the month at sunset, that lamb is then slaughtered. And so if you take it on the 10th, you have it for the 11th, the 12th, the 13th, and then you're slaughtering it on the 14th. It's just that, the way God uses days, he's like, yes, you're going to take the lamb on the 10th, okay? then you have it for the full day on the 11th, the full day on the 12th, the full day on the 13th, and then at sunset on the 14th, you're slaughtering it. Just the way, the whole story of Passover, the whole story of the Israelites coming out of Egypt, the whole story, when you read the story, you need to expand your viewpoint to see it as a foreshadowing, as a typology of God's relationship with the church and of him sending Jesus. You need to expand the way you view the story that you've probably been told since childhood. You need to read it with fresh eyes, see it with fresh eyes, and then expand the way you view it so that you can get an idea of the way God sees his church. So here, centuries later, God is preparing his church. He's preparing his church to receive his son, the ultimate lamb that was sacrificed. And here, centuries earlier, he is giving us all a foreshadowing of what that will be like. So you have to take the lamb into your home. You live with the lamb in your home for 3 days. The lamb is petted by your children. The lamb is looked after and fed. It lives with you amongst your family. And then on the 14th of Nisan, you slaughter that same lamb. And again, just this foreshadowing, this typology of Jesus coming to the earth and living amongst us on the earth. And then being crucified. That he walked amongst the Jewish people. They knew him. They walked with him. They spoke with him. They ate with him. They heard his teachings. They questioned him. They debated with him. And yet, ultimately, they crucified him. Just, can you see the concept? Because I think sometimes we don't always enlarge our perspective to actually see what that means for the church today. So then you take some of the blood and you smear it on the two sides and the top of the door frame. So the two sides and the top of the door frame. The blood is smeared like that at the entrance of the house in which they eat it. And then he tells them how to eat it, and he tells them all of the things. And he says that Exodus 12 verse 11, it is Adonai's Pesach or Passover. For that night I will pass through the land of Egypt and kill all the firstborn in the land. And I will execute judgment against all the gods of Egypt. I will execute judgment against all the gods of Egypt. And this will be a day for you to remember, etc., etc. And so it goes on. What I want to get to is this part, because obviously we feel immensely compassionate for the Egyptians. Immensely compassionate for the Egyptians. Because, Pharaoh made a decision that impacted them all negatively. And again, you just have to look at nations today, where the pharaohs of this world make decisions that impact their people negatively, and their people then live with the consequences of those decisions, okay, with very little ability to, change those decisions or make them any different. But he says, it says here, the people of Israel went and did as Adonai had ordered, and we're looking at Exodus chapter 12, verse 29, and at midnight Adonai killed all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh sitting on his throne to the firstborn of the prisoner in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of livestock. Pharaoh got up in the night, he and all his servants and all the Egyptians, and there was horrendous wailing in Egypt, for there wasn't a single house without someone dead in it. And then Pharaoh is just like, just go, just go, just go, just go. Just go, just go, just go. And the people, so the Israelites take all their things, and then they take, so God is, remember, Moses has told them to ask the Egyptians for silver and gold, and they have gone and asked the Egyptians, and God has granted them favor, and so the Egyptians have given them silver and gold, and so they leave with wealth, they leave with produce, they leave with, they don't go out with nothing, they go out with much. So they go out with much. Let's remember that. God doesn't send them out, with nothing completely. God sends them out with much that they receive from the Egyptians. The fact that they use the much that they were sent out with incorrectly later on is not God's. It's not God's fault. And, when God sends you out, he sends you out with much. Maybe it doesn't look like the much that you think, but he does send you out with much. And it's how do you steward that much as you go out. So, but it says this as well. So, Exodus 12, verse 37, the people of Israel traveled from Ramses to Sukkot, some 600,000 men on foot, not counting children. Okay. And then it says, a mixed crowd also went up with them, as well as livestock in large numbers, both flocks and herds. A mixed crowd also went out with them. In other words, they were people who were not Hebrews, who were not Israelites, who were Egyptian, who were, who had watched and witnessed what God had done with the plagues, and had reached the point where they were like, we believe in this God. We are believing in this God of the universe. We are believing in Israel's one true God, and we are going to go along with what they do. We don't want to be left out. We don't want to be excluded. We don't want to receive the fallout from this, the fallout from the decisions that the Pharaoh have made. We are going to follow along with the Jewish people and paint the blood of the Lamb on our lintels, and thus they were spared what God did because they stood in faith based on their belief in the God of Israel. And then they left Egypt with the Israelites. A mixed crowd went up with them. That crowd that left Egypt was, yes, it was mainly, or probably the majority, Israelites, but a mixed crowd. There were others who went up with them, others who were so right from that space in time, God was demonstrating the Gentiles being grafted in to the vine, the Gentiles being grafted in to the promise that had been given to Israel. Right from then, God was demonstrating how this would happen, because there were Gentiles who left Egypt with the Israelites and traveled with them through the wilderness and then settled in the promised land. They were Gentiles. So right there, God was demonstrating already what it would look like for the Gentiles to be grafted into the vine, for the Gentiles to be grafted in to the promise that he had given to Israel. He was demonstrating that way back then. Because what did they have to do? They had to accept the blood, that the blood was going to be their saving grace, that the blood of the Lamb was going to be what caused them to be spared from ultimate punishment. And once they accepted that, and once they did what the Israelites did, they then were able to go with them. And is it not the same when Jesus was crucified? The Jewish people had an opportunity to believe in Jesus, and many of them unfortunately did not. But the offer was then extended to the Gentiles. This is the blood of the ultimate Lamb, the ultimate sacrifice that has been made for you. Will you accept the blood? Will you receive the blood? Will you receive the saving grace, the salvation of the blood that has been shed for you? Will you receive it? The invitation went out to the Jewish people because Jesus was crucified amongst the Jewish people. But then it was extended to the Gentiles on Pentecost. And then as the apostles went out to Judea, to Samaria, and to the ends of the earth, the invitation was then extended to the Gentiles. The same thing that happened in Egypt, the same thing, just on a much larger scale and with a different Lamb, the ultimate Lamb, happened again in Israel centuries later. it's just amazing. It's just amazing, the correlation between the two things, the typology, the foreshadowing, the way God was saying, this is just an example. This is just a microcosmic example of what I'm going to do. This is just a promise that is available to this group of people, but one day that promise is going to be available to the whole world. And actually, the Gentiles are going to be more receptive to that promise than God's own people, because that's pretty much what has happened. So it's just, when you read the story and you read it in the light of Jesus' sacrifice, and then you read it also for us today in the light of for us today. When God calls us out of something, when we read things in the New Testament like separate yourself, come out from amongst them, come out in Revelation, come out from Babylon, come out, separate yourselves, be my people set aside for me. That was what God was continuously saying to the Israelites. Be my people set aside for me, be my people separated for me, be my people set apart for me. And the Israelites wanted it, but they also didn't want it. They wanted to be God's people that God always rescued, that God always stepped up for, that God always did all the things for, but they wanted to be separated and set apart in terms of the favor of the Lord. But they didn't want to be separated and set apart in terms of the way all the nations did their things. They wanted to be the same. They didn't want God as their king, because who has a king that isn't tangible, that you can't actually see with your own eyes? We want a king. What did they say to God? We want a king the same as the other nations. Just like the other nations have their kings, we want a king. And do we not do that today? Is the church not doing that today? And I'm generalizing here, and I'm speaking global church, but on the whole, is the church not doing that today? Where, we want the favor of God, we want the blessing of God, we want to be separated out, and we want to be set apart, and we want to be special, and we want to be favorites, and we want to be unique, but at the same time, we also want to be able to fit in with the world. We don't want to be too separated. We don't want to be too set apart. We don't want to be too special. We don't want people to look at us and be, oh no, they're special, very odd. We want to fit in with the way the world does things. We want to be able to still be a part, but when we want it, we want to be favored by God. So it's like we say to the Lord, yes, Lord, I give my life to you. I want to live my life to you. I want to be separated out. I want your favor. I want your blessing. But I just also want to still be able to, be a part of this messy thing over here. But God, that's not what God does. God is an all or nothing God. He's an all or nothing God. And yes, there is grace. And yes, we journey with God through these things. We journey with the Lord as he says, okay, you've got to lay that down. You've got to lay that down. You've got to lay that down. It is a journey, and he doesn't expect it all to happen on the day that you accept him as your Lord and Savior. And then you just, he understands it's a journey. But eventually, when you've journeyed with the Lord for a significant amount of time, there comes a time where he's like, are you all in? Are you all in? Are you all in? Do you still want to hang on to these worldly spaces and places and things? And remember, we are in the world, but not of the world. That's what it tells us in the New Testament, right? So we have to be in the world to a degree. We have jobs, we have, we interact with people, because how else are we going to be the salt and the light if we're not in the world? But we cannot be of the world. We cannot be, holy, pious, and all those things on a Sunday, for example, and then Monday to Saturday, we just live completely worldly lives as if we've never heard the name Jesus. But then we still expect God's favor when we apply for promotion. We still expect God's favor when we pray for people. We still expect God's favor when things are difficult or things come against us. We still expect God's favor, but we're not actually all in. And that was the Israelites. The whole history of Israel. It's clear as day in the Bible. They wanted to be, the ones who had the only access to the one true God, and therefore, were always favored and blessed by Him. But they didn't want to give up the things that they saw the other nations enjoying and doing. They didn't want to give that up. They wanted to still be able to live like the other Gentile nations as well. And, at some point in time, after much grace, much forgiveness, much love, much mercy, God says to us, okay, all right, now it's time to nail your colors to the mast. Now it's time to, the rubber's going to meet the road now. Are you all in? Are you all in? Are you prepared to come out and be truly set apart for me, so that it is easy for the world to see that you are a light because you are not a part of the darkness? So there they leave with a mixed multitude of people. The CJB says a mixed crowd. Other translations say a mixed multitude of people. And they go, and it says, Exodus chapter 12, verse 40, the time the people of Israel lived in Egypt was 430 years. At the end of 430 years, to the day, all the divisions of Adonai left the land of Egypt. This was a night when Adonai kept vigil to bring them out of the land of Egypt. And this same night continues to be a night when Adonai keeps vigil for all the people of Israel through all their generations. Isn't it just amazing? But now I want to just move on a little bit from Passover, because something really, just in all of this, in all of this being separated out, in all of this, those of us who are wanting to be part of the new thing that God is doing, in all of this, that we feel like God is calling us out from, from church as we know it into something new, into the wilderness, because we don't know exactly what that looks like. In all of this, the Israelites leave Egypt and they take the bones of Joseph and they go out, and God doesn't guide them. In Exodus 13 verse 17, it says, after Pharaoh had let the people go, God did not guide them to the highway that goes through the land of the Philistines because it was close by. God thought that the people, upon seeing war, might change their minds and return to Egypt. Rather, God led the people by a roundabout route through the desert by the sea. The people of Israel went up from the land of Egypt fully armed. Okay, so there's so much in just that. Okay, so God didn't take them the way that they all expected to go, because He's thinking, if the people see the Philistines and war and everything, they'll probably just run straight back to Egypt. That's going to be too much for them. I'm going to take them a roundabout way. And so just, how often does God say to us, we are called to this, or we are called to that, or we are going to, and then we can see that if we want to get to that point that God has called us to, we need to go from here to here. And then God takes us off here. And we start our roundabout journey through to what God has ultimately called us to. But God does that, and this is just a digression because it just occurred to me when I was reading the story. God does that because if he says to you, this is what I've called you to, but if He took you the direct route to that calling, you would be intimidated. You would be in fear. You need to take a roundabout route with the Lord to get to what God has called you to, so that He can build you up along the way, so that He can strengthen you along the way, so that He can get rid of the Egypt in you, so that you can come to that ultimate destiny. So, again, that's just so God, isn't it? So He takes them the roundabout way. They leave Egypt fully armed. So they are fully equipped, they are fully armed, they have everything they need, okay? And then obviously they get to the Red Sea. So Pharaoh now has a change of heart, and he's like, I'm going to chase after them. We're going to get them back. I'm not letting this God defeat me. And he has a change of heart, and he starts to pursue them. And of course, of course, the people of Israel, not known necessarily for their patience. And so in Exodus chapter 14, they cry out to Moses and they say, was it because there weren't enough graves in Egypt that you brought us out to die in the desert? Why have you done this to us, bringing us out of Egypt? Didn't we tell you in Egypt to let us alone? We'll just go on being slaves for the Egyptians. It would be better for us to be the Egyptian slaves than to die in the desert. How many times? How many times does God call you out of a space or call you out of a place? How many times over the history of the church has God called his church out of something, called them to step into something different? And the moment, and there's great excitement around it. And yes, this is going to be fabulous. And then the moment, the first kind of hurdle, the moment you caught between the Red Sea and the armies of Egypt, bearing in mind that the Israelites were fully armed when they left Egypt. And there were many of them, okay? Maybe not as much as the Egyptians, but they were fully armed. They had all the tools. And God calls us out and he's given us all the tools and he's done all the things. And then we're like, oh my word, is this why you took me out of this space? Just so that I could land up here in this place, like lost, and isolated and with no friends and no family and nobody, just when you read these stories, see your own life in that story. See how many times you felt like you've been caught between a rock and a hard place. And you've said to the Lord, really, 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 is this why you brought me here? Did you bring me here so that I could just be crushed between the rock and the hard place? Like, was this always your plan? Did you not think this through, God? What on earth are you doing, Lord? Right. So Moses tells them to stop being so fearful. Remain steady and you will see how Adonai is going to save you. He will do it today. Today you have seen the Egyptians, but you will never see them again. Adonai will do battle for you. Just calm yourselves down. But I love God's response. Exodus chapter 14, verse 15. Adonai asks Moses, why are you crying to me? Why are you crying to me? And I think that is just God. I think that often that is what God is saying to us. Why are you crying to me? But why are you have literally, the people of Israel have just watched me perform 10 plagues over Egypt. You have just watched the miracle that happened when you painted your doorsteps with the blood of the Lamb. You have just watched the miracle that happened, that none of you were afflicted by the death of the firstborn. You have been given silver and gold from Egypt. I got the people of Egypt to give you silver and gold. You are fully armed. You have all the tools. You have everything you need to make this journey and occupy the land I'm giving you. You have everything. But at the first hurdle, the first time that you caught between a rock and a hard place, you cry to me. Why are you crying to me? Like, what? You can just imagine in today's language, in today's space, God going like, what is wrong with you? I'm sorry, can we go back over your life? Can we see the miracles that you have experienced in your life, the times I've come through for you, the testimonies that you have, the provision I have made, everything, just saving you was a miracle. And now you think that I can't cope with this? The Egyptians behind you and the Red Sea in front of you? You think I can't do this? Stop crying to me. I promise you, I know that I have heard the Lord say that to me. Maybe not in those exact words, but like, really, Sally? Really? Really? After everything you've seen me do, you think this is going to be too much for me? Really, Sally? Just, why are you crying to me? God says. And of course, the angel of the Lord, goes ahead of them, and the sea parts, and they move through on dry land. And then the Israelites cross over on the dry land, all of them, and the Egyptians are swallowed up by the sea. And, and then they come out on the other side. And then, they are praising. And obviously, Exodus chapter 15, I will sing to Adonai, for he is highly exalted. The horse and its rider he threw in the sea. Yah is my strength and my song, and he has become my salvation. This is my God, I will glorify him. My father's God, I will exalt him. Adonai is a warrior. Adonai is his name. And they sing this whole song, this whole song to the Lord about how amazing he is. And then, as we all know, 5 minutes later, something else happens, and they've completely forgotten that their God is a God of miracles, and they're back to crying to him. So I just think, that when we read these things, I think sometimes we read these things about, the deliverance of Israel out of Egypt and the Passover and all of that. And we think, yes, okay, it happened to the Jewish people, it's for the Jewish people and all of that. And I'm not saying that you have to celebrate Passover, the way the Jewish people celebrate it or anything, but it is a time to know that God is a God of redemption. That God is a God who brings you out or sends you out, and he doesn't leave you unequipped. He doesn't send you out and you're completely unequipped. He sends you out with everything that you need, with all the tools, with all the things. But he sends you out also, with your memory of the testimonies that you have from everything he's done in your life before. And then he sends you out and he's like, it's okay. There be giants. There be giants ahead of you. But I am the God of miracles. I am the God who goes before you. I am the God who is your rear guard. I am that God. So no, don't cry to go back into Egypt. Don't cry to go back into Egypt. And I just think that over this time, over this week, of Passover, and then over the weekend of us just commemorating the crucifixion of Jesus and the resurrection, his resurrection from the dead, just to bring those things, to ask God am I all in, Jesus? Am I all in? Do I think I'm all in, but I'm still hanging on to something? Am I all in? Because I want everything that you have, full redemption, full restoration, the fullness of everything you have for me. I want to enter into my promised land. And so what do I need to do? Because I don't necessarily want to wander around the wilderness for 40 years like the Israelites did. I want to step into that promised land. I want to step into that promise that was the promise, that is the promise of Jesus. I want to remember that centuries ago, you used a little lamb. But centuries later, you sacrificed your own son as the ultimate lamb. And he is also the ultimate lion. So just, it's just sometimes we just need a bit of a different perspective on things. Sometimes we just need to understand that the story of the Bible from the first page to the last page is all of our story. It's all of our story because we can relate in one way or another to everything that happened. It's the story for all of us. It's the story of Jesus, and it's the story for all of us. Okay, that's me, lovely people. First time on YouTube Live. Yay, very excited. Let me know if it was better than Facebook Live or worse than Facebook Live or easier or whatever the case may be. Let me know. I would love to hear from you. And I love each and every one of you. Have an absolutely fabulous weekend. And I will see you again on Monday morning at 7 a.m. on Facebook Live. Monday morning, 7 a.m. for Start Your Week with Sally on Facebook Live. Remember, the lamb and the lion. We celebrate them both. Love you. Bless you. See you again. Not sure how to stop this. Hold on a second. I need to figure out how to stop this. Somebody help me. I don't know how to stop it. Where does it tell you to leave or stop or end or something? Yes, I'm still getting used to it, people. I need help here. I'm pushing buttons. No. Okay, no. Right. I'm just going to end it and hope it works. Love you. Bless you. Bye. Yes, I'm about to press the X, Tishka. Thank you.